Like when I think about our relationships, our relationship with our emotions, most people do not have the healthiest of relationship unless you've done some work, right? Because there's just a lot of reasons. And that's why there is that emotion piece in Ascend, because we want you to start to be able to recognize them, to really build your emotional intelligence. With this, we have all these ideas about anger and whether it's okay or not okay to be angry, right? And there's some gender differences, there's cultural differences. But April, to your point, I think, people have this like relationship with anger itself that's like murky and can cause a lot of stuff like, oh, I shouldn't feel this way, or explosive, kind of both sides of the spectrum. But I actually think I'm right along with you. I think anger is actually easier in terms of intense emotions. It's an easier one to experience because of that target.
You're listening to episode 266 of the Building Psychological Strength podcast, where we uncover the information, tools, and techniques to turn our mind into our most valuable asset.
The courage to face fears with persistence.
Being able to be present enough in this moment to choose my response thoughtfully.
We have the strength to bend to life stressors, to bend to adversity without snapping, without breaking.
There are only 6 things that contribute to our quality of life, and they are all experiences.
In every moment, we are deciding who we want to be and how we want to live our lives.
Noticing what your brain is doing and then being able to make choices.
Mobilize the things that we know lift us up.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Building Psych Strength podcast. My name is April and I'm your host. I want to thank you for being here. Oh my gosh, every month that I log into the software thing that I use to push the podcast out to all the places that it goes, it's the best feeling to see how many people are tuning into this podcast because they are taking their own mental health and their own psych strength abilities seriously. I talk about it a lot, but I actually practice all of the things that we talk about on this podcast, and I know the value and the improvement that it has made in my own life. And every time I see those numbers tick up, download numbers from all over the world, every time I see them tick up, it is the best feeling to know that people are investing in themselves in this way. So thank you for being here. You are amazing. So today I actually want to give you a little treat. One of the main programs that we sell inside the Peak Mind Center, it's actually our signature program. It's called Ascend. This program is focused on giving people an end-to-end comprehensive set of skills and frameworks that they can use to improve in a few areas. And those areas are these. The first area is you, meaning your level of self-awareness and your level of understanding about who you are and what makes you tick. That's what the whole first module of Ascend is about that. So we dive into who you are and your values and your strengths and the intersection between all of those things to get to know you at a very deep level. Module 2 goes over the second main component, which is your mind. We do a deep dive into how your mind works, some incredible techniques for making it work more in your favor so that you have a more favorable life experience, because truly our mind is the lens through which we experience life. So the better we're doing there, the better our life experience is. And then finally, in the third module, we go over your life. We go through a life design exercise that you can come back to again and again to continue to make improvements in your own life. I mean, this thing is comprehensive. That's why it's our signature program. One of the things that you get with that program is access to live calls with us. Sometimes on these live calls, we cover topics that are inside the Ascend program. Maybe we hear from our members like, hey, we're kind of getting stuck here. Can you dive deeper? Can you cover this more? But sometimes, like today, we cover topics that are just timely. They're things that our members are struggling with because they are happening out in the world or in society, and we want to be there as a resource. And so on our most recent May live call for the month of May, we focused on some of the emotional and life design elements that we're all going to be experiencing as we go through this next shift in this whole COVID experience that we've all been going through. Specifically, we talk about why this experience is so difficult for us emotionally. We get into the volatility of it, the uncertainty of it, some other elements we dive into pretty deeply. We talk about this mixed set of emotions. And in particular, we have a really powerful conversation about anger. There's a lot of mixed emotions that people are experiencing as the world opens back up. Elation, excitement, optimism. We're starting to make progress. This is amazing. Yet COVID is still out there, and there's this changing landscape that we all have to be flexible within. And anger plays this interesting role in situations that feel very uncertain. And we unpack that at a deep level in this call. I actually wanted to share that call with this broader podcast audience because I really think it is a topic that you'll benefit from. So as a special treat this week, we're going to share the audio of our behind the scenes, typically only available to members of the Ascend program, that live call. One thing to note, my microphone malfunctioned on the call itself, so you'll notice that I sound a little bit different on the call than I typically do on the podcast. It was just a weird mic issue. So you should be able to kind of acclimate your ear to that slightly different sound on this episode. We'll be back with my normal mic in future episodes. But just know that that's the case, that we had a little snafu there. But regardless, the content is really good. And I really feel like it's going to be a helpful resource for you as you contemplate how your own individual life will shift and change as COVID, hopefully, let's all cross our fingers, wanes and comes to an end. And at the end of this episode, I'll throw some information about the Ascend program itself in case you're interested in it. But for right now, what I'll say is you can go to peakmindpsychology.com/ascend. You can get a ton of information about the program there. That's peakmindpsychology.com/ascend. Tons of info about the program, see whether it's something that you might be right for you. But regardless, please enjoy this recording of our most recent live call with our members in there. And I hope that it provides a lot of value for you as you enter into this next chapter of a very changing landscape that we've all been going through.
Well, why don't we go ahead and get rocking and rolling on this month's Ascend live call. Sometimes in these calls, we talk about, specific modules in the Ascend program. Sometimes we'll go through a particular module in more depth. Hello to everyone who's joining. We'll go into a particular module in more depth. But the benefit of us having these calls on a regular basis is that we can also use them to address situations that we're all going through. When, for example, when COVID first hit over a year ago, Ashley and I started doing these live sessions. Was it twice a week? Were we doing twice a week? Yeah, twice a week, just to support people, because the transition we were all going through was such a big one that it's almost hard to remember what the experience we were all in over a year ago. Mm-hmm. Well, now we find ourselves at the beginning or the start line of another transition. And that is as the world is slowly opening back up, as vaccinations are happening, and more and more places, not everywhere yet, obviously, but more places are getting COVID under control. We were faced with this idea of going back to, quote, normal. But what does that even mean? And do we want to go back? And can we even? And there's a lot that's wrapped up in that. We've got a set of topics that we want to touch on for sure. But I would love it if you all could be very active in the chat. Let us know if you have particular questions, because this is an important topic and it's something that we're all going to be going through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So one place that I wanted to start, I'm a big fan of the habit change literature, and it's a weird thing to say to start this call, but I swear it's related. I do. When we talk about habit change, even the parts of habit change that are in the Ascend program, we think about a lot of the myths that you hear around habit change. And one of those is it takes 30 days to cement a new habit, or, some amount of time, right? People will name an amount of time. And when you think about what a habit change actually is, you can see why that sentence is just ridiculous. A habit change happens when our mind was used to doing things one way, or used to us behaving in one way. And now we're going to behave in a way that is new or different. So we're going to react differently in a situation. We're going to decide to not do a behavior or to do a behavior. And that change is different. And for that change to truly feel second nature almost, or have it feel much more effortless to continue doing or not doing, depending upon what the habit is. What we're really talking about is neuroplasticity. We're talking about our mind sort of rewiring and remapping itself to say, oh, okay, cool. It used to be that in the case of that scenario with those people in this context, this is how I behaved. Now I'm doing it differently. Okay, cool. And eventually your mind catches on, and it actually creates, lays down new tracks, essentially. 30 days is super not enough time for that to happen. It's really not.
Yeah. Well, and I think just, some of the pieces that I know we like to talk about in April, I'm with you on like the being a fan of the habit change literature, which it's weird to say, given that I'm, a behaviorist at heart and I've been in the business of behavior change for nearly 20 years. It's been the last couple of really understanding the impact of habit formation and habit change. And it's super cool. But really what we're talking about, what April's saying with this neuroplasticity thing, and when it comes to habits, is our brain likes to automate stuff. It wants to be able to do things in a lazy, I don't even want to call it lazy, but in an automatic, efficient way. That's what a habit is. It's when you're doing something different. And when you make that change in the beginning, think about any time you've made a behavior change, working out, wearing masks to go places, washing your hands when you come in from outside. So we've got these COVID changes or just life changes. When you want to make a change in the beginning, it's effortful. You have to be aware. You have to have motivation that you can tap into. You have to decide and do things different. Habit formation is then that process where your brain kind of takes over and it's like, oh, okay, I got the new rule, guys. I got it. I'll take over, and it automates it.
Yeah. And if you think about the situation that we've all been in around working from home being one, if that was a change that you experienced, 2, wearing a mask into public places, some of the other just safety precautions that we've had to do, maybe places have limited the number of people who could be in there, hours that you could go, all of these just changes to our lifestyle. They're all changing again now, coming up. And I was interested to talk about this topic because I noticed, so in my state in the US, the vaccination rate is actually really high. We are approaching the 70% mark, and people are really going in, quickly to get vaccinated. And what that means is mask mandates are lifting. And now, right, the CDC lifted their mask mandate as well. CDC being, for those who are not in the US, being the governing body that is sort of all things health and healthcare sort of in the US. They definitely run like Centers for Disease Control. They run things like masking and responses to pandemics. Anyway, they lifted their mask mandate, and I found myself going into a store the other day, and like there was this icky hesitation. And I'm like, oh, interesting. My mind is screaming at me, put your mask on. That's
You're breaking the rule.
Right. That's what I'm used to. I'm used to you walk in and put your mask on. But technically, I don't have to. And that small thing, right? That tiny thing around, do I put this piece of cloth on my face or not? If that registered on my mind as having like this little bit of internal, like, turmoil, like, there are so many other implications that are to come as we make these changes. And so that's what we wanted to talk about today, because we've all been in this new normal for so long. And now we're about to shake things up again.
Well, and I think it's going to be an ongoing discussion, I think, really, because, as everybody's like, hey, we're getting back to normal or post-COVID. And part of where this, and we'll tie all of this in. So we've got like the changes in the rules and the habits and what that does when you break those in terms of that inside ick. Then we also just have this ambiguity and what's okay and what isn't okay. And we want to go back to this new normal and post-COVID, but it's not like COVID is gone. This would be a lot easier if it was, yay, we have defeated COVID. It no longer exists on our planet. It is a threat in the past. Then we would have this like little bit of ick as you break the rules, your brain would adjust, bingo, piece of cake. But now we're in this position where we're still having to assess, well, what is the actual threat? And the model that we used, does it still apply? And what I mean by that is, like, think back when COVID first started and there were just even more unknowns. So it was, don't bring packages in your house, let them sit for 3 days, or don't touch surfaces. And I've seen, my day job is working with anxiety and OCD. So I've seen where that gets kind of hard when people grab onto that, and that becomes the rule that doesn't change. But what we have to do is be flexible and able to take current experience and current information and adjust based on that. So our understanding of COVID has shifted some over the past year, which is great. And we can make some of those adjustments. But then we're also in this period now as things, in Kansas City, we're in the same boat. Mask mandates have been lifted on both the Missouri and the Kansas side, but it's up to individual businesses. So there's still that making the decisions. Do I still wear a mask or not? Do I require them in my office as a business owner? And we have to navigate this ambiguity and this uncertainty and the ick that comes with breaking the rules. And should we listen to that ick or not? And it's a hot mess.
It is. And it makes me think of an acronym that we've used on these calls, I think in the past and also in the podcast often, is one that comes from the US military, and it's VUCA, VUCA. It stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So volatile, certain, complex, and ambiguous situations are just known to be some of the most difficult situations to handle, because to your point, Ashley, because of the ambiguity of it, there's not a clear cut yes or no. There's not like a clear cut, like tight black and white answer. It's changing. It's not an easy problem for us to handle, right? And that's the situation that we've been in and that we continue to be in, just in this new way. And what I was interested in talking about today, one piece of this is the piece that ties back to Ascend around the committee. So in Ascend, in the Your Mind section, you, depending upon how far into the program you are, you'll encounter what we call the committee in your mind. These are the voices that we hear in our mind, the sort of reactive side of our mind that has something to say, has a judgment about literally everything going on in our lives. It just chatters at us. They tend to get loud in situations that are VUCA situations. Really, they're super loud in those situations. And in situations where we break a habit or we break a rule that we used to be able to rely on. So if we go back to my example with the mask, that's such a tiny thing, right? It's a tiny thing, but I hesitated going into the store because I'm like, what do I do? The committee in my mind is saying, put your mask on, put your mask on, put your mask on, put your mask on. Like, you're used to doing that. What are you doing? Mm-hmm. But the rational side of my brain is saying, wait a minute, I maybe don't have to. But then the committee side of my brain comes back and says, aren't you uncomfortable if you don't? Look at how uncomfortable you are. Let's just make her feel really awkward if she doesn't. And I ended up putting my mask on because I'm like, I just feel weird. I just feel weird. And this feels like a situation where the behavior itself is not of critical importance. But when you think about bigger transitions that we're all going to make, transitions, and we get into some life design stuff here, but transitions in our time, in our day, where and how we work, who we're around. Oh my gosh, my little mask example is like the tip of the iceberg with
peanuts, right? It's tiny. Yeah. Well, and I think it's there's a lot here, right? And I'm glad you bring up life design, because that was the other piece that when I'm thinking about, this transition period, life design is a huge part of it. So it's how do we deal with this committee? And I think that all of the skills that you're learning in Ascend, how to recognize the committee, how to detach from them so that you control your choices, not them, how to let your values dictate that. And I think this is a place too where it can get, it just gets super complicated. And I don't know how it is everywhere, but where I am, masking or not masking isn't just what's the mandate in the city. It is not just where's your threat assessment in terms of catching or transmitting COVID. It also taps identity because it's become sort of this political representation too. So wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, when the choice is yours, all of a sudden we've got even more committee members piping in, right? Do you wear the mask to stay safe? Do you wear the mask to stay comfortable? Do you wear the mask to keep other people safe? Do you wear the mask to let people know that you lean left, politically speaking? Do you wear the mask so that you don't get shamed by the others around you? Like, it's a mess, right? And this is one tiny thing.
It's complex. One of the words that I think it's actually from anthropology, the field of anthropology, not the store. I was talking about the store, but I'm not. From the field of anthropology is called virtue signaling. So we do certain things, right, with our behavior, maybe even with clothes that we wear, with decisions that we make, judgments of others that we make, because what we're trying to do is we're signaling that we have a particular value or that we have a particular virtue. And that is one of the pieces that's wrapped up in masking right now, to your point, Ashley. Yeah. So there's some serious complexity here.
It really is. And I think this is where all of your psychological strength skills come in, is to be able to, one, just pause and recognize everything that's coming up inside, right? That's the inside ick, or that getting to know your mind, the thoughts, the feelings, the memories, the sensations, the urges, just being able to recognize everything that's coming up and to start to sort through it. What's helpful and what isn't? Where's my voice in this as the asset, as my core self, who I want to be? Where does that come into play? Because in a lot of this, there's not an easy answer. There's not a right or wrong. And you're going to have to be able to check in with your own internal compass and make these decisions. And not just with masking. I'm also thinking, bigger when it comes to kind of this life design piece. And I've had conversations with a lot of people lately where it's been this kind of mixed bag of, I'm very excited to get back to some of these things that I've been missing, like lunch with a friend, or concerts are starting to happen where I live. Events are happening. And so it's I want to do all of these things, but I'm also kind of apprehensive about it or scared about it. And so navigating that conflict, like, to be honest, humans, we house a lot of conflicting thoughts and feelings, but we don't like it. We don't do a good job of being able to have them at the same time. These, in the therapy world, it's called a dialectic. It's two opposing ideas that can be true at the same time. We tend to bounce back and forth. Mm-hmm. So if you're bouncing back and forth, that's normal. But being able to hold them both, I am excited and scared.
Yeah.
We've got this opportunity to really look at, we kind of have this forced break, this forced take stock of life and what's working. So as we're going back, you can look at, what am I excited about? But we don't want to let the hedonistic part override rational thinking, right? Oh, forget it. It's over. I'm going to go do everything. But I also want to talk a little bit about kind of that shell-shocked feeling that people are having as they are getting, I hear it especially from parents, as kids' activities have started up again, where you went from like this nice pace of life that maybe felt a little bit better to all of a sudden you're like juggling 9 million things and it feels stressful and icky again.
Well, let's even start there, right? Because I feel like there is immense value. A lot of the skills that we teach take time to learn. They take time to practice and for you to really see the impact of them. But one of the things that we can give people almost immediately is clarity and an understanding of what is actually happening, like what's actually happening. And I think a lot of compassion comes from that. And that's almost instantaneous. So when we look at our lives, right? So kids' activities ceased to exist during this time. And there were definitely some, bad effects from that. Sure. But a lot of times in a culture where we talk about how busy we are and we stretch ourselves so thin, we get to Ashley's point, like we got this break from having to rush all over to all those activities. If you were a person who used to go into an office and now you work from home, your commute was likely eliminated. And if you just think about those two things and what those two things do to your life, think about for the last year, when have you been doing laundry? Just like randomly in the middle of the day. I don't know, Tuesday at lunch, I threw a load of laundry in, whatever. For a lot of people in their old life where they're commuting away from their home to an office for a 40-hour or more work week and running around with kids, to go back to the habit conversation we had, we are accustomed to having that space and flexibility that may be threatened to go away as we transition back. And the acknowledgement of what's happening is important because for so many of us, we have a loud critic committee member and other unhelpful ones who will attempt to say, why aren't you getting this done? Seriously, like, why can't you get this done? What's wrong with you? Like, you're just like slacking and you're not doing this well enough. When in fact, what's happening is all of the spaciousness that you used to have is gone. So it's really an exercise in compassion. Like, of course you're feeling like life is too full,
Right. Well, or the critic saying, why does this feel stressful? You used to do this all the time. This, and two things on that is, one, you probably were super stressed in the before and just didn't realize because you're
not easy to compare it to.
Right. I know for me, when I went from working like a 5-day whatever to my private practice and stepping my hours down to 3 days a week, I noticed then I could notice when something would really activate my stress response. I could feel it differently than I could before when I was just constantly in that state. So it was like getting a break from it. Now I am much more tuned in when my body is telling me this is stressful. So one thing, the other thing on this, like, why are you feeling this way, is you are out of practice. Mm-hmm. It's like, if, you go into the gym and you work out, you take a year off, you go back, you can't lift the same weight. And not because there's something wrong with you, but because that's just how it works.
Yeah, it absolutely is. So that just habit change lifestyle piece, being aware of what's actually happening, being aware that the committee is getting loud can be such an asset in these situations, because think about the alternative. Think about the alternative that realistically, most of your coworkers, most of your family, most of everybody going through this will live this experience differently than you. Mm-hmm. Most of them will take that committee member as fact. Most of them will say, no, I'm doing horribly. Like I'm not performing as well as I want to be performing, and they'll get down on themselves. What you have the ability to do, to Ashley's point about being flexible and using your psych strength skills, is to say, no, I'm doing just fine. Like I'm navigating a weird circumstance and I'm doing just fine. I recognize that voice is just my past familiarity zone squawking at me. And I don't really have to take it to heart or pay attention to it. I'm doing just fine. I'm doing the best I can, given the circumstances, which are not easy. They are VUCA.
Yeah, I love that. I always think of, I never remember VUCA, like the term, until you say it. But as soon as you start to reference the idea, what goes through my mind is the phrase "embrace the suck." Yeah. And it came from like some work from Brene Brown and she did with the military, and that phrase that they would use, "embrace the suck." And that applies here too, is that sometimes, and this is an acceptance move, being able to take things as they actually are, embrace it, be open to it, non-reactive, choosing your response. So we're hitting all of these: mindfulness, diffusion, acceptance, all of these skills that you really need to be able to pause, see what's going on, and really be in charge of your life experience, even when it's hard.
Yeah. There's some interesting pieces here too around our ability to handle some other elements of the uncertainty of this change. So as we, Ashley, you just mentioned it in your area, and it's similar here, where there are no more mask mandates, but individual businesses can decide. So just this morning, I went into Target, and masks are not required there. I was still like anxious and in my committee head. So I was like wearing mine because I just felt weird. But masks were not required in Target. And I went right next door to Ulta, a makeup and like cosmetic store. And I mean, signs all over, like you have to wear a mask in here. And you can imagine where that experience, like everybody probably has a family member who will fall into this description, who's going to get really angry about that situation. Like, come on, these people don't, how am I supposed to know? Whatever the case may be, there's going to be a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty about where can I and where shouldn't I, and how do I handle this? And there too, psych strength skills can really help you, because you can start to do some of the pieces where you tease apart. Is this inside of my control or not? How big is this problem actually? Am I making it a larger problem than it actually is? There's a lot there that what is in Ascend, and this was our goal the whole time, to teach you skills and frameworks that apply somewhere else. And they certainly do in this case.
Well, and I think this is a really interesting one to think about, kind of this uncertainty, ambiguity, and the tie-in with anger. And I'm flashing back to when this all first started. And I remember having conversations and doing some writing around that. And it stems from a lot of judgment and a lot of, because our brains like to make rules, for better or worse, right or wrong. They create rules that govern us. And when someone else is violating our rules, we're going to get upset. And oftentimes it's going to be anxiety or it's going to be anger. So this certainly, I mean, it goes on both sides, right? How come I have to wear a mask here? I don't anywhere else. Or how come they don't have to wear a mask? That's not safe. So we've got both sides. And I love your point of like, is this in my control?
Yeah.
And that's a flexibility move. That's a psych strength move, to be able to pause again and say, here's what's coming up, because otherwise it's easy to get consumed, particularly by anger. We don't like uncertainty. It makes us anxious. We don't know what to expect. Therefore, we don't have the assumption of safety. So our threat detection system in our brain doesn't like it. And basically, anxiety doesn't like uncertainty.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other piece to that anger, we've talked about this a few times throughout COVID, but I can see it happening again. I was in a couple social situations where I'm like, woo, we're going back to that again, is that Anger as an emotion is a tough one to manage. We don't like feeling that way. But anger is a lot easier to manage when there's a clear target.
Yeah.
I'm mad at you, right?
Yeah.
We can point at someone. Anger's extremely, significantly harder to handle when it's a targetless anger. When there's not anyone to, quote, blame, we have a tough time managing that emotion and knowing what to do with it, to the point that we will attempt to find somebody to blame because it makes it a lot easier to handle.
Oh man, this is a great thing to unpack here, because when I think about our relationship with our emotions, most people do not have the healthiest of relationship unless you've done some work, right? Because there's just a lot of reasons. And that's why there is that emotion piece in Ascend, because we want you to start to be able to recognize them, to really build your emotional intelligence. With this, we have all these ideas about anger and whether it's okay or not okay to be angry, right? And there's some gender differences, there's cultural differences. But April, to your point, I think, people have this relationship with anger itself that's murky and can cause a lot of stuff oh, I shouldn't feel this way, or explosive, kind of both sides of the spectrum. But I actually think I'm right along with you. I think anger is actually easier in terms of intense emotions. It's an easier one to experience because of that target, right? I can be angry at someone. And so a lot of times anger is masking something else that's ickier, harder. And that could be fear, disappointment, hurt, shame, something.
Yeah.
So that we need to kind of tease apart of just really, what is this anger? I mean, anger in and of itself means someone or something is doing something I don't like, or I'm being blocked from doing what I want to do. Right? That's the message of anger. Okay. Anxiety is fear, danger, or that's danger, something bad's going to happen. Guilt is I did something wrong. So the message of anger is something or someone is getting in my way of doing what I want to do. All right. Yeah. So it makes sense we'd have some anger here, right? All year. But we do want to point it somewhere.
Yeah.
And I really think that's a really important point, and a little bit of self-disclosure here. It's something that I've noticed just in terms of getting to know my committee was a sneakier one, is that when I feel angry, I feel very justified in it. And my persecutor kicks in. I am right. Other people are wrong. And there's that tendency to blame, and being able to recognize that as, wait a minute. This is just a mental habit kicking in. I feel angry. Let me explain it. Let me justify it. And it's not always helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that. And I know you used it intentionally, the word helpful there, because ultimately, I think for a lot of us, one of our goals, daily sort of life goals, is to, especially if you're a life design subscriber, a person who, gets behind that as a tactic, your goal is to have as much joy and contentment and alignment in your day as possible. Walking around being angry all day is not that. It isn't that.
Right.
And so if that's your goal, being able to use these techniques to understand and unpack that anger, which will naturally occur, right? There's nothing wrong with the emotion. There's nothing wrong with you that it happened. But if your goal is to have an enjoyable day and thus an enjoyable life experience, having tools to help you understand and unpack that anger is really helpful, to the point that as you start to unpack that anger, it almost gets comedic to a sense. What exactly am I angry at? So there's masks somewhere and not masks other places, and we were all just in this situation. What am I mad at? Cool. I'm mad at a spike protein. It almost gets comedic. There isn't a person to be angry at. And when you boil it down to what we're truly angry at, what is truly to blame for this? Do you think it cares? Is it paying attention to you? No, it just gets comedic almost. Like I picture those little cartoons of the COVID virus with its little like antennas sticking off of it. And I'm like, okay, I feel silly now for being angry.
I love that. I hadn't considered the comedic value, but to be honest, that's also a great way to deal with the anger, right? If you can sort of personify it and tap into that humor, that's an awesome skill. Side note. What I hear from it is often when we get angry, it's because the shoulds are being violated, right? That is an expectation. And this is, it should or it shouldn't be this way. They should or shouldn't do that. And that's on you. That's on me, right? That's our committee. That's our mind setting these rules and expectations. Now, I'm not saying, anger is not bad. Sometimes righteous anger can be incredibly powerful. It can be a catalyst for really important change. Think about, civil rights and climate change and things like that. People get angry and they funnel that anger into meaningful change.
Yeah.
That's very different than sitting and stewing and walking around pissed off all day. Angry all day, right? So that's it. I think that's important to look at, right? Because sometimes we have this natural emotion. Yep. It's just a shortcut telling me there's something about this situation. Now, my committee can hijack it. This is that controlling the narrative exercise that's inside Ascend. I can say, I feel angry, period. Or my committee can take over. They shouldn't, it shouldn't be this way. When is life, blah, blah. And then I'm just like raging against something, to your point, April, that doesn't care, that I can't influence, that makes no difference. So to me, it's, well, do I want to spend my time in that space or not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love the technique of adding the period at the end of the sentence. I'm angry, period. I love that technique. I also love the technique of around, and this works for any really difficult emotions. Our knee-jerk reaction around emotions that are not fun to feel is to try to distract ourselves or try to avoid them, right? Like we don't want to have anything to do with them. And what we find, and Ashley, it's really was you who turned me on to a lot of this work around, the more we try to avoid and the more we wrestle with something, the more deeply we end up encoding it and the more we end up feeling it more often, more severely, all of it. So the tactic to help us get around that is to step into the observing mind, like the part of your mind that is just awareness. It's just taking in the raw data from the world. And then the rest of our mind, adds context around it and interprets it. But in this sense, it's stepping into your observing mind. And instead of averting your eyes from your emotion and from your anger and trying to avoid it, it's staring directly at your anger. Like, okay, where is it in my body and how does it feel?
But it's observing it, not getting consumed by it.
Correct. Yeah. Like, what does it feel like? Where is it? Is it a hot feeling? Is it a tingling feeling? Does it have edges? Does it feel heavy? Like you're staring right at it for the purpose of describing it or observing it, not for the purpose of wrestling with it. And I mean, think about those two mindsets, right? The mindset of being consumed by it, thinking, oh my God, I can't believe these people. And oh, that's annoying over there. And I shouldn't have to do it this way. And I can't believe that mindset versus I'm feeling angry. It feels really heavy in my chest. And I am feeling like my body is getting warmer and I'm having the urge to react and scream at my significant other or whatever it happens to be. Very different mindset, just right out of the gate.
Yeah. Well, there's some interesting neurological pieces behind this too, right? So with that, I think of that unhealthy relationship a lot of people have with emotions. One is we want to suppress or avoid. Right. And there's this saying, I just heard this one the other day. Apparently it's a Carl Jung quote. So this is like old school psychologist. that which we resist persists.
Mm-hmm.
So if we resist it, it will persist, right? And that's what we're talking about here. The flip side is getting flooded, where it's just fight or flight takes over. There's physiological changes. This is the whole like you see red kind of thing. So April, you're talking about this third path. It's a very mindful path. Neurologically speaking, when you hit that observation point and you are describing, you are using language, you're pulling your prefrontal cortex back online. So think of it as emotion center, fight or flight. And then we have our logic center that goes offline when it gets triggered. This mindfulness helps you pull the logic back online. Tapping into the language helps you pull your logic back online. So it's a really cool skill.
Yeah, I really love that. You had mentioned there was something in a parenting book that you were reading.
Yeah.
Tell me about that, because I feel like that was in this domain, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is just another version of it. So I'm reading a book, Raising Good Humans or something like that. But basically it's all of this mindfulness applied to parenting, and it's good stuff. But what I really liked was she shared a technique from Tara Brach, and Tara Brach is a pretty well-known like meditation teacher. And the technique, it's called RAIN, RAIN. And it's for dealing with, in the context I was reading it, it was specific to anger, especially when it's not helpful and you don't want to act on it. But it goes along with everything you just said, April. So it starts, R is recognize. If you've been with us for a while, you know we harp on bad is not a feeling. We want you to recognize and name the actual feeling. I feel angry. So recognize it. A is acknowledge and accept it, right? Yes, of course I feel angry. I is investigate. That's that part. What does it look like? What does it feel like? Does it have a movement? Where are the edges? So we're approaching it with curiosity, hitting that observer mindset. So it's all the stuff you were just talking about. This just puts it in a cute little acronym. And the N is nurture. That's and what do you need in this moment?
Wow.
You can add the self-compassionate touch. Maybe that's putting a hand over your heart, cupping your face, giving yourself a hug. But if we go, so recognize, acknowledge and accept, investigate, nurture. What do I need? Maybe I just need like a kind word, like, girl, you got this. This is hard. It's a VUCA situation. You can do this, but some sort of that's more of an action there. That's going to be a lot more helpful than just screaming. Like to the point there's the old advice of like scream into a pillow or punch a pillow when you're angry, like release it in that kind of way. And I'm really not a fan of that, because what you practice grows stronger, right? Habits. So if you practice punching a pillow or screaming to release this anger, like that's going to be your default. And at some point that's going to come out.
Yeah.
Not when you want it to.
Yeah.
You look thoughtful.
Well, I was thinking how easy it is to forget that last, like the N, how easy it is to forget that. We talk a lot. We've done several speaking engagements recently with corporate clients where we've talked about things like compassion, ways to protect the asset. You'll remember that from Ascend. That was a very strong theme in that program. But the nurture side of this, the more people are studying it in self-compassion literature and other places, the more we're seeing what a critical step this is and how much we don't do it. We tend to, I spoke with a group of entrepreneurs recently, and we talked about committee members that are very prominent in entrepreneurs, one of them being this taskmaster. And so many times it's like we take a very check the box, task oriented approach to situations like this, where we're like, oh, okay, great. And then on to the next thing. Like I move on, like keep going. But when you miss that nurture step, you're missing out on providing value to yourself that we're finding, again, in data is more and more impactful. We just didn't realize how critical it was and what kind of feedback loop it creates in even just your relationship with yourself. You know?
Yeah. And again, from that like neurological basis, tapping into self-compassion and that nurturing activates a different circuitry in your brain that releases different hormones and chemicals. So you get, instead of the stress ones like cortisol and what most people call adrenaline, you get oxytocin and dopamine. That's bonding and feel good. So, and I throw this out because my initial response to self-compassion and nurturing was like, that feels woo-woo and soft. But the data are there. I actually, as a psychologist and someone in mental health, think mindfulness and self-compassion are two of the biggest, and they go together, two of the biggest things you can do as a person to take care of you, just like exercising is one of the best things you can do for your physical health. It's one of the best things you can do for your mental health. And it affects your physical health, side note, but I won't go down that path. It's good stuff. And the other piece is you can nurture in a way that's not like soft. You can be fiercely compassionate with yourself. You can tap into that and have an edge and have a fierce quality to it. And that's something that I think a lot of people miss too. So we're not saying like, oh, poor baby, wallow, whatever, but we're saying be supportive. Tap that coach, that inner good coach.
Yeah.
That wise advisor.
Yeah.
Do some self-care.
Yeah, I love this so much. It makes me feel like with the remaining time that we have, I just want to like put a plug out there. If you are on the call live and you have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat, or if there's areas you want us to cover before we're done, make sure that you get those in the chat. One thing that I would love to just spend a little bit of time on is just looking at our own lives and our own situations and helping to think through what we might be facing coming up. So like if we spend just a few minutes, and if you just have a piece of paper, or you can even just do this mentally, thinking about just to kind of make a mental note of it. I mean, think about the aspects of your life that changed drastically at the beginning of COVID. Like the big areas of your life, was it, and you could even go, actually, I'm going to do a quick Google so that I can make sure I hit all of them. But if you Google something called the Wheel of Life, or you could even use the life domains that are in the Ascend program in the life design, module 3 of it. But if you even like take a systematic approach within your family, what were the big changes that happened? So from a family perspective, how about socially? That was huge for us. Seeing people and going and having like social engagements or connecting to others just, in these random moments, that completely stopped. Your career, any changes there? Financial, changes in your financial and money situation, spiritual, and then physical, and intellectual. And again, you can look at the ones that are in Ascend too. They're a little bit more detailed than these. But if you kind of go across there and think about, okay, prior to where we were during COVID compared to the last year and a half, what was going on in those different domains of my life? And then thinking ahead, how do I see them shifting again? And which elements do I want to shift and which ones don't I? Like this is both an exercise in awareness around what might be to come. And if you're doing the work in Ascend, you can probably start to anticipate which committee members will show up and what they'll say. So you're ready for it. So what changes are to come? And where do I want to exert some of that radical responsibility that I accept by being a life design subscriber? How can I influence things in the direction that I want them to go as things back up?
Yeah, I think this is good stuff. And to the other piece that comes to mind is really just being open and being present, right? So we can anticipate some things, we can be intentional about some things, but I think this is a great opportunity from a life design and from a psych strength perspective. So life design, pay attention. Ooh, I'm back into this and I don't like this addition. I don't have to do it anymore. One of the things from COVID is a lot of the things we took for granted, that this is just how it is, or this is how I have to do things. No, we don't. Now, it may not be an easy thing to say, I'm not going back into the office. I really like working from home. Mm-hmm. Or I used to spend all this time with these people, but I really don't enjoy it anymore. And I'm not going to anymore.
Yeah.
That's okay. The other piece is this openness. And I know when it comes to a comment in the chat about seeing family that you haven't seen in a long time. And I just had that experience of, I hadn't seen family since pre-COVID and was very, very excited, a little bit anxious. And it was an interesting experience in terms of trying to be open and just notice, what is this like? Because it didn't necessarily feel the way it used to. And I don't know if that's because I was out of the habit. So our dynamics had shifted, if it was, changed as a person or what it is, but there's this opportunity to really be skillful and be open and just notice what comes up. And it might be a very overwhelming feeling. There might be there's this one feeling that I don't think we have a good name for in the English language. It's very powerful. It feels like if you kind of start with sorting emotions like net positive or net negative, it's net positive, but comes with tears and overwhelm, but is a good thing. Like when you see the videos of like the military folks coming home and their dogs greeting them and their kids greeting them, that's like the boo-hoo, I'm crying, but I'm so happy.
Yeah.
That feeling might come up.
Yeah.
It's big. Make space for it.
Yeah.
Just make space.
Oh man. I really love that. And the other piece too, that's been interesting, is just on, you mentioned feeling a little bit anxious to see family, perhaps even feeling a little bit anxious for social engagements again. We just have, just out of the evolution of us as a species becoming, the adorable little animals that we are, you mentioned it with the gym. We get out of practice of a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I've noticed is that remembering people's names, it's like really hard because I didn't see anybody. I didn't call anybody by their names. I saw like 8 people all of the last year. And that was not the way that my life was before. Just be kind with yourself about areas where you are just out of practice. Be really kind in that regard. Sorry, one last thing too that I want to mention. The benefit that we all have had in COVID is it's a unique one. And it's that we've all gone through adversity at the same time. If you've ever been in the situation where you've gone through maybe something with your health or a family struggle that's been particularly stressful and difficult, you can almost have this urge to not share your struggle or how you're doing because it's only happening to you. You don't want to put the burden on other people. So you feel like, okay, I just have to handle my stuff. Like I just need to handle it. And one benefit that I've seen through COVID is that this is happening to everybody. And there's been like an opening of struggle. We've been more open about saying, oh my God, trying to work from home and do distance learning is next to impossible. Or I'm really lonely and I'm struggling with that, because we don't feel like we're burdening other people because they know they've been in.
Yeah.
We're just so much more open. And I would just suggest continue that. Like everybody is going to be going through this like painfully awkward transition. It's like COVID adolescence we're about to go through, right? Like we're going to be all like teeth and gangly arms and like, it's just going to be awkward for everybody. So just continue that openness that we've developed.
I think that's such a good point, April, because that does come up. And I know like in my own experience with vision loss, I know working with people and there's sort of this coming out about anxiety or depression or whatever it is. And it can feel like the committee kicks in, like don't burden other people.
Yeah.
If they know that, they're going to realize like something's really wrong with you. They'll reject you. And we end up, honestly, that fuels shame. And that makes our burden bigger and heavier and ickier. And almost always, in my experience, when people have shared, it's scary and uncomfortable, but it's a good thing. We feel more connected and we get social support, which is something that's very, very important for humans. I mean, our brain's wired for that. So it's a good thing. And I love this point. You're right. People have been talking more because we've got this shared adversity. And I do hope it continues, not just post-COVID, like adjustment, but also when you've got unique things that come up too. I would love for it to be okay for people. Well, it's okay to not be okay. And I would really like to see a shift in our culture where we talk about it.
I love that. I love that. As
Very
we're wrapping up, I want to make sure I do one more call for questions. Appreciate the comments that we got. That is so helpful. And it's awesome to see people sharing their own experience. I mean, there's a lot that's going on through this right now. And we can even take questions about the Ascend program as well. If you're like stuck in a particular part or you're struggling with the concept, feel free to ask about that. That is completely fine and very welcome on these calls as well. We have some really great stuff coming up that I want to make sure that you all know about. That could potentially apply to this crew. We're just still working things out. We're doing more and more work on the corporate side, sharing workshops, doing some hands-on work, some custom work for corporate clients. So wanted to just put that out there to if you know of someone in the corporate space who's looking for mental health related things, we've got a lot of that going on as well. And some cool things coming up with the podcast. We recently started doing these Friday episodes that are more professional focused. If you want to think about, or if you want help thinking about how a lot of these concepts apply in a professional setting, whether you're a business owner or a person in a typical job, we've got resources coming out in that regard as well. We're just expanding our reach and expanding the type of content and support that we're putting out there. So I just wanted to mention those couple of things, just in case they are helpful for anyone. Awesome. All right. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for joining us for this monthly call. Next month, I don't know, we'll usually we sort of feel out there as to what the right topic is. So in between now and then, if things come up, if you want us to cover a particular topic, please let us know and we'd be happy to do that. Otherwise, we definitely don't lack for coming up with ideas to talk to you guys about. So, but we're always happy to have you call an audible and direct us and tell us to dig in a particular area. Yeah. Cool. Until then, have an amazing month, you guys. Keep messaging us. Let us know what we can do to help, and we'll talk next month. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Tell me if this sounds like you. I'll finally be happy. I'll finally take a breath. I'll finally find some balance when I get through this crazy season of life. We hear that from so many people, and the fact is, many times, life is just a crazy season. All of it. Between your career, your family, your community obligations, attempting to have a social life, and trying to fit in self-care, whatever that is, we end up feeling stretched so thin. Now, I want to challenge you to think about things differently. Rather than focusing on external circumstances and their impact on your happiness, your sense of ease and balance, and your mental well-being, what if instead you focused on something you can actually control? What if you built the psychological strength that would allow you to thrive through life when things are going well and even when they're not? What if you could feel less scattered, more in control, less anxious, more peaceful and joyful? We want that for you too. That's why we are so beyond excited to announce the beta release of our signature Psych Strength Building program, Ascend. This program combines evidence-based tools, techniques, and information from the fields of psychology and life design to focus on 3 important modules: you, your mind, and your life. Learn your unique combination of strengths, values, and identity, and the ways in which they interact and lead you to approach life in your unique way. Dig into your mind to understand the conscious and subconscious processes that act as a lens through which you experience life. And finally, harness the power of life design to begin to steer your life into alignment with who you uniquely are. Enrollment in this beta round of Ascend is open now, and because it's our beta round, the price is astonishingly low. So if you have ever had even a suspicion that you could benefit from building psychological strength through a guided, science-backed experience, now is the time. Visit www.peakmindpsychology.com/ascend for more information and to join us. Friends, it is time to build psychological strength. It's time to live by design and not by default. It is time to live like your life depends on it, because it does. Join us in Ascend by visiting www.peakmindpsychology.com/ascend. That's www.peakmindpsychology.com/ascend. It's a simple fact that nearly everyone in the world could benefit from building psychological strength, but not everyone will put in the time and effort to do so. But today you did. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Building Psychological Strength. Now, if you're interested in building the mental toughness, confidence, and resilience you need to thrive through life's ups and downs, visit us at www.peakmindpsychology.com. Also, if there's someone in your life who could benefit from this episode, please share it with them. And if you yourself found this episode valuable, meaning if you took away even one insight that you can use to build psychological strength in your own life, we would so appreciate it if you would drop us a rating and a review on iTunes. The thing is, the more ratings and reviews we have, the easier it is to get this powerful and important content out to the people who need to hear it. Remember, your mind can be your most valuable asset or your biggest liability, and you get to choose. So choose wisely, my friend. And I'll see you next time on Building Psychological Strength.